A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Let's update where things are at with a steep rise in anti-Semitism in Australia. You might remember that significant event that's developed around the Sydney Opera House 2 days after the October 7 Hamas terror attack in Israel. You'll remember that attack back in 2023 saw the mass killing of 1,200 Israelis at a music festival, 251 hostages taken by Hamas into the Gaza Strip. That, of course, is the reason for the war between Israel and Hamas. You might remember the Reverend Mark Leach, an Anglican minister who courageously unfurled the Israeli flag at that now infamous pro-Hamas protest near the Opera House. He waved it for about a minute before he was quickly surrounded by a group of angry young men. He says he was chased by the group down a nearby street where police eventually intervened. And since that day, Mark Leach has been on a mission. He's the co-founder and CEO of the movement called Never Again is Now. He's been speaking around Australia on disturbing developments in anti-Semitism. So let's get an update on developments. Always a pleasure. Mark Leach, welcome back to 2020.
Well, thank you very much, Neil. It's great to be on your show, and it's great to talk to your listeners and share with them what we've been up to and what's happening around the country and ways we can keep working together with the Jewish community to make sure this wonderful country of ours stays safe and free for everybody.
Mark, I mentioned the story around that day back in 2023, 9th of October it was. You were there near the cathedral there in Sydney, and you decided you'd unfurl the Israeli flag. You've got a Jewish heritage yourself. When you reflect on that moment, how significant is that? It's like a turning point, I guess, for your life.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. It was one of those moments where you do what's right. It seemed to me very clearly this was the right thing to do as a Christian leader, to stand with the Jewish community in that moment of great distress and to stand for Australia. So I did what was right, but I had no idea that God would take that one little act of obedience and use it to catalyze a national movement for cultural renewal, for waking up the church to stand alongside the Jewish people, but more than that, waking up the church to stand to influence Australia for the common good, to continue to preserve our Judeo-Christian heritage and values as the best foundation of all for ensuring the safety of the Jewish community. So, the verse in my head that keeps repeating is really, it's the story of Esther, and it's Esther 4:13, where Mordecai says to Esther that perhaps God has put her in the court for such a time as this to protect and spare the Jewish people. So that's very much how I feel about it. Okay,
you are now in the court, let's say the courts of the Lord. And for such a time as this, and over this past, 18, 20 months since that time now. Time flies by, you might say, except to say that in all of that there's been this horrendous rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. And you are saying now that Australia's at a critical turning point, like a fork in the road. We could go one way, we could go to another. Two different futures ahead. How are you thinking about where things are going, given this rise of anti-Semitism we've witnessed?
Well, I would say the choice we have to make is between a future where we become increasingly tribal and aligned around our religious or ethnic or cultural or socio-demographic group identities, and we retreat into warring, competing tribal identities, or we continue to build a nation state that is one unified group of citizens where our common allegiance and identity is determined by this nation in which God has placed us, and our religious and ethnic and cultural backgrounds are secondary to that. And that's very critical, because the development of a nation state under God in a country like Australia is an incredible invention to stop tribes killing each other. And we don't want to get back into that. In Australia, we in our country, we don't kill each other over religious differences. You know, it's been in the 1890s and early 20th century, there were pitched battles between Irish Protestants and Catholics. But that's the last time we had any real sectarian violence, tribal violence in Sydney and in Australia. And we want to keep it that way. And what we've seen since October the 7th, 2023, is the very, very, very concerning rise of tribalism, fomented and disguised by the anti-Zionist cry, but really expressing hatred of Jews, hatred of Western civilization by this coalition of the radical left and the jihadist Islamic community. And we need to oppose that. That's our choice: tribalism or a unified, safe nation state.
You know, here we are in Australia, and we've been shaped by our Judeo-Christian heritage, and we've been able to see through our own history ability to be able to resolve conflict and live as a nation in some level of harmony. That Judeo-Christian heritage is important, but now we're looking at things that are going on in the Middle East, and the war between Israel and Hamas, things not easily resolved. And we risk, if we leave those fundamental factors of our Judeo-Christian heritage to the side, you say, we're risking moving into a tribalised environment too. That doesn't look good for the future, does it? If we do divide, polarise as a nation, tribalism, that is a very bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way humanity has lived for a very long time, and the wonderful thing that's happened in our civilization's history is that we have managed to construct a political organization largely based out of readings of the Hebrew scriptures out of the Old Testament, that we have a limited government, we have one nation state uniting the 12 tribes of Israel. All of these, the political theory behind Australia comes right from the Torah, which we forget, and we forget it at our peril. And so we have to preserve these freedoms. And I think it's vital for Christians to understand that we have a duty to seek the welfare of the city, as the prophet Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 29. We're called to love our neighbors. And I really believe one of the practical ways as Christians we're to love our neighbors is to ensure that we remain a safe, harmonious nation state grounded in these core values that actually stretch back 1,000 years with our English heritage, actually, and our practice of law and limited government and so forth. So there's a practical call to love, to be involved in the maintenance of this kind of civil society.
And I guess it starts with individuals, and then it can unite communities, and then hopefully we might be even prayerful, unite our nation around those common things that can give us a harmonious society. Hey, over the last 16 months, might even be 18 months, Australia's witnessed this unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism. We've seen Jewish homes attacked, we've seen schools vandalised, places of worship vandalised, set on fire even. We've got to remind ourselves from time to time that these things happened on our Australian soil. Now, you're planning a tour to southeast Queensland. What sort of things do you deliver when you're speaking to audiences, when you're talking about the way this anti-Semitism has developed in Australia?
Well, I work very hard to help people understand how we've got to where we are and what are the theological and philosophical and political roots of this current crisis that we face. I talk about the roots of anti-Semitism, both Christian anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism of the hard left and the hard right, and also Islamic anti-Semitism. And we think about how that's working out, and then cast a vision about how we can actually work together in our country to ensure that that we remain a safe and free nation state and oppose this kind of hatred.
It might appear that a lot of those anti-Semitic attacks have happened in major centres like Sydney or Melbourne, synagogues being attacked and such things. I do note, though, in Queensland, in May, some disturbing anti-Semitic graffiti with Nazi symbols discovered at Robina on the Gold Coast. You're coming to southeast Queensland and you're going to be delivering some messages to gatherings there. Is there something that is developing in Queensland that attracts your attention that says, I need to be speaking to people in Queensland?
Mate, I just love Queensland. What can I say? And I love Queenslanders. I mean, you know what? Yeah. Who needs an excuse to come to southeast Queensland? No, look, this issue of anti-Semitism it's a civilizational issue. We're facing a clash of civilizations and a vision of the kind of area we want to be in the next 20 and 30 years. And this is an issue for every Australian, not just those who live where there are high levels of Jewish people. This is something, it matters for everyone who votes, everyone who values this country. Anti-Semitism is a virus that spreads, and the hatred of Western civilization, this tendency to divide us from each other and set groups apart against each other, this is an issue for everyone. And what we want, what I want, what we're working for at Never Again is now, is a national movement of cultural renewal with a vision of Australia where we remain the very best example of Western civilization, built on our Judeo-Christian values, and where every minority, including the Jewish minority, is safe and free. And so that impacts Queenslanders, because Queenslanders will make decisions about how to treat their neighbours, who to vote for in their local councils, what sort of decisions we'll make around divisions around socioeconomics or religion, what kind of religious impact we want in the public square. There are all sorts of decisions that go far beyond just the narrow focus on anti-Semitism to speak to a broader sort of country we want to be.
You might be seeking that warm winter's day visit to Queensland. I'm not ignorant of the fact, though, as a little bit of a search of some headlines might show us that even Jewish holiday celebrations in Brisbane were disrupted by some aggressive protesters. There were neo-Nazi propaganda appearing in local suburbs in Queensland. And a woman wearing a Nazi symbol shirt was allegedly seen outside a Sunshine Coast school, raising alarm across the state. You're coming to Queensland and you'll be talking to some groups which will be church leaders only and some that will be open to the general public. Is there something special that you're delivering to leaders that they need to know? I guess if you get leaders right, you'll get their followers as well. But is there something special about speaking to the leaders?
Yes, I think the very real risk for church leaders, and I've been an Anglican pastor for 30 years, the real risk for church leaders is we get so caught up with just the day-to-day business of running a church and keeping people happy that we lose sight of the bigger vision that God might have for us and for our church to play in our local community. And so at least part of what I'm trying to say to the local church leaders is lift your eyes beyond the local congregation to see how God might use you as a church leader in your church community to be a blessing in your local community and to be involved in the in standing against hatred in this country and taking a stand for the Jewish people. That's the first thing. The second thing is there is a need in the church leadership to combat the idea that God has given up on Israel and the Jews. It's what's called in the textbooks replacement theology, this idea that, well, you know, the Jews are suffering because of their rejection of Jesus. They're getting what they deserve. God's turned his back on them. They were plan A. God's now got plan B. And so we should just move on from the Jews. And they're just a people like any other people. And that's a pernicious and evil theology. I understand where it comes from, but we have to grapple with it because if God can reject the Jewish people, given all the promises he made to them through the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, if he can change his mind on them and go from plan A to plan B, what's to say he won't go from plan B to plan C? Where's our assurance of salvation? Where's our confidence in the unchanging covenantal love of God if he will abandon his chosen people, Israel. So we need to think that through, address that, think about what that means for our understanding of the gospel, our understanding of Jesus, and what that means then politically and socially in this very contested space. The problem with replacement theology understood that way is it leads to very bad outcomes. Like, we don't stand up against anti-Semitism. We allow pogroms, we allow all sorts of libels against Jewish people, and in the end we allow the Holocaust to happen. And we can't allow that to happen here in Australia.
Let's all come to an agreement. God is true to his word, and he has proved time and again throughout the history of the whole of the Jewish people. And there's been ups and downs in there. There's been dreadful, tragic things have happened to the Jewish people. But God's promises hold true. And for those who might hold to this idea of a replacement theology, it's a little bit of a, give yourself a good shake and say, wait a minute, God is true to his word. His people are his people. He has restored them to the land. This is prophetic fulfillment, something that a Christian needs to understand. And I suspect there'd be some who haven't understood it in the light that you've just explained it there, Mark. That if God is not true to his word for his people, his chosen people, how can we trust that he'll be true to his word for the Christian population? Hey, you're coming to the state of Queensland. You're going to be speaking on the Gold Coast Tuesday the 15th of July, in Brisbane Wednesday the 16th of July, the Sunshine Coast Thursday the 17th of July, and the Fraser Coast Friday the 18th of July. I know that some of those venues are yet to be confirmed, but for listeners, they can get details about that visit to the state of Queensland at neveragainisnow.com.au. Neveragainisnow.com.au. No doubt some of those venues are being booked and crystallised, and sometimes if you've got a meeting like yours, you might even be a little bit secretive, so people will be able to register and be part of that. How does that all work, Mark?
Yeah, so all the venues are booked, but this is the sad reality of being Jewish in Australia today. When you run a public meeting as a Jew in Australia, you cannot allow the venue to be made known in advance because of security concerns. So that's a crazy thing. So we won't release, once you register for our event on the website, 24 hours before the event, you'll get an email telling you where it's going to happen. Now, just imagine if you were your local Indigenous footy club and you wanted to have a barbecue in the park, but you couldn't tell anyone which park you were going to be in because you were afraid of racists attacking you. That's the reality of the Jewish life in Australia today. So yes, go on our website, neveragainisnow.com.au, register for the event, come on out. We need to build a movement of love in this country. That's really what it's about, and I look forward to seeing everybody there and having some really wonderful and hopeful and inspiring conversations.
Well, this is where anti-Semitism has gotten us to here in Australia, secretive venues. But for those listeners in those communities, Gold Coast, Brisbane, Sunshine Coast and the Fraser Coast, neveragainisnow.com.au to find out where you can hear our special update today, Mark Leach, and the Reverend Mark Leach, I might say, who leads the movement called Never Again Is Now. Mark, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
It's a pleasure, Neil, and I hope your listeners have got some value and some spiritual encouragement out of this. And I want to finish with this. God's plans will triumph. God is a God of love and justice and peace. So be encouraged. We know how the story ends, and it's good. It's going to be hard on the way, but it's a great ending. So God bless, Neil. Thank you so much.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.